Enso is a software live looping plugin by Audio Damage. This is the very first video I've done on a purely software-based looping approach, and a big part of that is because Enso has some features that are very unusual to find in live looping. In this video, we're going to look at what are called sectors in Enso terminology. This lets you take an initial loop and then isolate a smaller segment of that loop and work with just that segment as its own self-contained thing. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, that description might remind you of something we've covered before called loop windowing. And sectors, to my mind, are very much an example of loop windowing in action. We're going to look at recording an initial loop in Enso and working with sectors in different ways to alter both the playback and the content of the loop. After that, I'm going to ramble on for a bit about terminology, formalizing functions across different loopers, and trying to talk about different looping features in general. All right, let's record by starting a loop. Turn overdub off. So this is our entire loop right now, and Enso measures loops in degrees, just like degrees of a circle. So right now our start point is 0, meaning it's the original start point of the loop. The length is 360, which means 360 degrees, the entirety of the circle, or the entirety of the loop. Now, we recorded in what's called Sector 1, and sectors are basically a way of taking the entire loop length and then windowing it down to a smaller slice of that loop, which can be any number of degrees long, and it can start anywhere you want. So let's shorten the length. So now we're at 180, which is exactly halfway through, and you can hear that now the sector is only half as long as it was. Keep shortening. Now it's 90 degrees, which is 1/4 of the length, and we can keep going until oblivion. And you can also move the start point. So for right now, let's move the start point back to 0. Let's make the length be 90 degrees so that it is exactly 1/4 of the loop. Now, sectors can be preset before you record your loop, and sectors 2, 3, 4 already had their start points and their lengths pre-programmed. So sector 2 begins 1/4 of the way through. The start point is 90 degrees. The length is 90 degrees. So this is taking the second quarter of the loop and just playing that. Sector 3 is the third quarter of the loop. Sector 4 is the fourth quarter of the loop. So you can switch between them. Right now we're jumping instantly. You can also crossfade between them, and you can crossfade up to a minute long. Let's do a 10-second crossfade, 10.4 seconds. We're on Sector 1. We're going to go to Sector 3. There we go. Now you can also adjust the start and length of a sector while you're crossfading. So let's go back to Sector 1, and then as we're doing that, I'm going to change the start point and the length of Sector 3. So jump back to Sector 1, and now adjusting Sector 3. There we go. Let's jump to Sector 4, and I'm going to adjust the start and the length of Sector 1 as we do that. So going to Sector 4 now. what's nice also is that if you look at these 4 different slices, the one that's lit up is the currently playing sector, but the other 3 sectors are also displayed. So if I move around the start point for sector 1, you can see that's moving around. So that tells you where sector 1 is. If I increase the length of sector 1, you can see that's getting bigger. So even though you only play 1 sector at a time, unless you're doing a long crossfade, it'll still show you what's going on with the other 3 sectors, which is really nice. So let's do this now. I am going to jump between sector 4 and sector 3, and I'm going to change the start and length of sector 3 without our hearing it. So let's see what's going on with sector 3. Alright, jump back to sector 4. I'm moving the start point of sector 3 back a little bit. Let's hear sector 3. Now it's in a different spot than it was. Let's go back to sector 4. Let's shorten the length of sector 3. There we go. Back to sector 4. Let's move the start point of sector 3 back. There we go. Move it back some more. Now what you can also do is overdub selectively just within a particular sector. So we haven't really talked about regular overdub yet, so let's do this. Let's make this sector the length of the entire loop. And let me overdub some sensitive, pensive tomfoolery. And let's reverse. Reverse again. Come out of overdub. Alright, so this is our entire loop now. If we jump back to the other 3 sectors, we'll have smaller slices of those. Let's just check in on what's going on. That's sector 1, sector 2, and then sector 3 right now is the entire loop. Let's go to sector 1, and let's say that we just want to overdub in here. So I'm going to bring feedback down a little bit. And I'm going to overdub. Feedback coming down is going to cause it to fade out a little bit. Now bring feedback back up to 100%. Let's reverse. Stop overdub. Alright, so we've just been overdubbing in this sector. Now if we expand the length and move the start point back a little bit, so now you can hear we're cutting into that sector where the overdub was. Let's reverse. Do a little more of this kind of thing. Let's jump to another sector. Bring the feedback down a hair. Overdub. Noodle. Reverse. Get out of overdub. Let's check out another sector. Sure, let's just go to the end of that one. This is 2. Yeah, let's overdub some very, very short bursts here. Hope this doesn't crash the computer. Now move the sector back a little bit. And let's do one more. Yeah, okay. Very coherent. And now let's see what we've got going on in this recently modified sector. Yeah, so we've got those little bursts where we were overdubbing in a very small sector. Let's reverse. I'm gonna overdub a little more normally. Bring feedback up to 100%. A little sloppy, oh well. Oh! Go with it. Well, when in doubt, let's get rid of just this sector. Boom. Now let's overdub. Come out of overdub. And let's check in on our other three sectors. So 1 and 3 are very similar, so let's move 3 somewhere else so we get some variety. Live looping is a weird field for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being that there's very little consensus on how to describe different types of looping functions. Part of that is because there's very little consensus on exactly what features are supposed to be included in a looping device in the first place. Most of us will agree that it needs to record audio, it needs to play that audio back in a loop, and it should probably be able to add new content to that loop. Beyond that, there's very little that you can assume is going to be included in a looper. Along those lines, when functions do appear across multiple looping devices, there's no guarantee that the same functionality will have the same name. Feedback is a perfect example of this. Depending on the looper, feedback is sometimes referred to as decay, or loop aging, or fading. Now, this is assuming that there's even a feedback control on the looper in the first place, which unfortunately is by no means a foregone conclusion, but that's a whole different cloud for me to shake my fist at. So when I talk about loop windowing, I'm using a term I've been familiar with for a little over 20 years, which describes certain ways of segmenting the playback of a loop. I first heard the term loop windowing used by David Torn, and I believe it was first formally applied with the Echoplex Digital Pro in the Loop 4 software upgrade. Enso calls this kind of functionality sectors, the Lupe uses the term scroll, and there are things like the Zoya and the Eventide pedals that let you move the start and length of a loop but don't have a fancy name to describe it. To me, the value in having a shared vocabulary is that it makes things easier to discuss and understand. If different synth companies each had their own terms for oscillators and filters and sequencers, it would become very difficult to talk about synths in a meaningful way. So when I describe Enso as doing loop windowing, that doesn't mean that Audio Damage needs to redo the plugin with that particular terminology. I'm using that term because it's one that I've been using for many years that is applicable to what's going on in different devices, including Enso. I'm definitely not trying to make the rest of the looping world conform to my own experience or adopt the terminology that I'm most familiar with. But what I am trying to do, among other things, is create dialogues about this stuff and share information about different looping instruments in ways that highlight both their similarities and their differences. For me, that involves using certain terms that I've grown accustomed to and have used repeatedly in my own body of work as I've documented this stuff. I'm not opposed to modifying that terminology, and I don't necessarily think that anyone else has to adopt it, but I do think that developing a shared vocabulary of what we do with this stuff is an important part of learning more about it. So things like this video are my attempt at trying to do that to the best of my current ability. As always, your mileage may vary, and rightly so. In the meantime, thank you so much as always for tuning in. I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.